So for the school kids, if I can get you to be just a little bit patient at the end of the Mass, we have one of these for you, and I hope you can look forward to that. In the meantime, I was wondering if we could talk about faith. You know, I don't know where you are in faith. Lots of people, they walk into church and they think, oh, I don't really have a lot of faith, or I don't have enough faith. For right now, I just suspect you have enough. I don't know what that is. I don't know where you are, but I suspect you just have enough. You're here. That's something. I'd rather talk, if you will allow me, about the people who really struggle with faith, people who are not here. Did a little research. These are really rough numbers. There are about 19, 20 churches in Pinellas Park within our boundaries, if you will. If you just take most of them are smallish kind of churches, but if you just take an average and say 500 people will attend their church services sometime this weekend, that'll get you to 9,500 people attending church. Round it up, make it 10,000 people in Pinellas Park will attend church, but the population of our little town is about 100,000. That means 90,000 people, your neighbors, my neighbors, people living within eyesight of our church, are not going to go to our church or any church this weekend. I think we ought to be concerned about that. It's a big number. And you might just ask, well, why not? You know, what is it about them? Why won't they? Well, why won't they? And there's lots of reasons. Some of it just might be just ignorance. They don't know the faith. No one told it to them. They didn't grow up in a family that went to church. It's not that they have rejected it. They just don't know anything. Or maybe they know some, but they don't know enough. Or maybe what they know is wrong. Someone explained something to them badly one time, or no one explained it, and they sort of thought that, well, I guess this is what those people believe, and they were wrong about that. Certainly others have trouble with, some experience in their past. That could be they had a bad moment with a Christian. Might have been a priest, might have been a minister. But that bad moment has sort of tainted them, and they figure, well, I don't want to be around people like that. Certainly the same would be true of any time the church gets in the news in a negative way. The sexual abuse crisis would be a perfect example. Some people, whether they know about the church or not, they read that and decide, well, I don't want to be a part of that. And then there is also the possibility that they don't think they need it. That's our theory right now about probably about 300 people who used to come here before the pandemic and who no longer come. Our theory is that, the 10 weeks when we could not meet, they sort of got out of the practice of coming to church. And for some of them, of course, they were unable to come right back right away just by their own circumstances. So by the time they got to the point that it would have been okay, safe for them in their circumstances to rejoin us, they had suddenly sort of looked around and said, I don't think faith mattered. I don't think going to church on a Sunday made any difference in my life. And so why go? And so they stayed away. What are you going to do about that? Well, first, you need to remind yourself that, we are obligated to do something about this. Jesus, in the Great Commandments, the end of Mark, it starts with the word go. Go. Go and make disciples. Jesus is not expecting us to sit and wait until all 90,000 of them walk through our church door, and then we greet them, oh, so nice to have you. It would be nice, but that's probably not the dynamic that the Lord is after for us. Remember the parable of the lost sheep? He says that the shepherd leaves the 99 and goes and finds the lost one. So we are pretty obligated to do something about this. And, sorry about this, it's all of our responsibility. There's such a tendency, of course, to assume the job of evangelization is for the professionals. That is, priests, deacons, people that the church hires, something like that. It's their job. We'll pay them. We'll pay missionaries to go. Sorry, it's not quite the way this works. The more you dig into this, the more you realize when you got baptized into this mission. Now, if that scares you, that's okay, but it should not. Because if you're feeling the angst, if you will, that I used to feel about this topic, it was only because of a bad definition. I had in my head this idea of what it meant to evangelize. And that was a bad image, if you will, because I thought the only way to evangelize was either knock on people's doors, oh, that didn't sound like a good idea, or to grab a Bible and like thrust it in people's faces and ask them challenging questions or something. And I'm not any good at that either. And so I think we need to pause just to remind ourselves. Evangelization is simply the idea that you and I are able and willing to, given our own gifts, given our abilities, we will be able to share the faith. So it doesn't mean that we're all called to preach. You may not know this, but there is a member of our parish who does some street preaching. It's a remarkable thing, and some of you are probably thinking, what? But the good Lord has called him to this. He goes down near the pier, sets up a little microphone, and shares his faith. He's called to that. You're probably not called to that. But what are you called to? What am I called to? Well, I think a couple things. First of all, you and I are called to live out our faith, to in our lives, to be an example of what we believe. I'm reading right now this book about St. Paul, and it's fascinating in a lot of areas, but one of them that's really got me is the author has done a wonderful job of conveying how much the lives of just the ordinary Christians of the day, how much their witness, their living out the faith mattered to evangelization. Because the culture, the culture believed in all these different gods, all these different statues and all sorts of different stuff. The culture had no sexual morals whatsoever, hardly. And so when the Christian people began to, like one husband, one wife, when they began living that out, when they began caring about each other, especially given the fact that the churches were full of all sorts of different people, rich, poor, slave, free, Jews, Gentiles, all these different people. And others, outsiders, could look and say, how is it that you guys are getting along? There is no way you guys should be, talking to each other and getting along. It was a powerful witness. They lived so differently from their culture that became a stepping point for people to enter the faith. I don't see any reason why you and I can't do that. I don't see any reason why you and I cannot, in our lives, demonstrate our faith. This is going to take some work. When I was a teen, youth leaders used to do this thing for teens. I think it had a positive motive to it overall. It did have a bit of an underlying scare tactic thing. But they would ask us, if you were on trial for being a Christian, would there be enough evidence to convict you? It's an interesting question. Because if someone following us around notices what we do, and we just seem like we're doing what everybody else is doing, maybe something's amiss. Just take social media. If someone looks at your social media account, what does it say about you? Does it speak Christianity to you? And no, I'm not talking that you put up cute little pictures of scripture verses and that makes your feed Christian. No, I'm talking about the way you interact with people, the way you treat people, the way you respond, what you repost, those kind of things. Does someone look at that and say, well, that's different? But you also have to be careful. There's this quote that isn't actually a quote. It's attributed to St. Francis. The best researchers don't think he ever said it. But it's an interesting thought. The idea is preach the gospel at all times, and when necessary, use words. It's a good thought, the idea of we're called to live out our faith, but you need to be careful. That's not telling us that we don't have to ever use words, because you might be super Christian, super disciple of Christ, and everything you do, people might look at you and notice you and say, oh, there is something about that person. But if you're unwilling to tell them what that thing is, you haven't helped them. And so there comes a moment at which you need to be able to speak. That is not to say that you now suddenly have to, oh yes, let me tell you about the Trinity. You don't have to do that. You just need to answer some simple questions. Maybe the most simplest, answer the question, why is it that you came here this morning? Why do you come to church? That's a terrific question. Somebody could ask you, somebody at work, your neighbor. You freely mention that, oh yeah, I'm looking forward to, going to church this weekend. Going to take the kids, going to get the kids' backpacks blessed. Oh really, they say. Well, why would you do that? Well, it's a great moment. And just tell them. It's not a theological question. Just tell them why you go to church. And for heaven's sakes, be honest. Tell them, hey, I don't actually understand all of it. But I would hope that you'd be able to say that it makes a difference in my life. I know this. There have been times in my life where I haven't gone to church, and there are times when I have, and wow, these are better. They're not perfect, but they're better. Those sort of things, I think, if we could answer those questions for people, it would make a difference. Now, that is not to suggest that a year from now, when we talk about this, maybe again, that I'm going to say, wow, 90% of Pinellas Park comes to church and 10% are still out and about. Nah, it may be 12% and 88% still out. It's a slow process, but we just want to be open. We want to be inviting. We are called to help them. Because did you not read did you not hear in some of these passages where, take the gospel. Jesus is talking about the second coming, talking about this wonderful moment where the Lord will come back. That's going to be a great moment. Most of us don't think about it very often, but even when you do, you realize, wow, a chance to see the Lord and to be in right relationship with the Lord. So that's going to be a great moment. Do we not care about the others? The Lord will come and they will go, what? We should care. We should care. We got something amazing in our lives. Even if it's not a lot of faith, we got something going in our lives. We're on this great journey with our Lord. We should share it with other people.